will think you've healed until something small tears open the old wound again. A word, a silence, a look. Suddenly, the story you thought you buried breathes once more, whispering that you are still unworthy, still unseen, still too much or not enough. Most women carry such a story, a myth they were given long before they could speak it. It clings to the bones, shaping every choice, every heartbreak, every glance in the mirror. But the truth is this: the story was never yours. It was written by fear, by conditioning, by generations of women taught to shrink themselves into safety. The psyche learns early that love must be earned, that pain must be hidden, that silence is the price of belonging. And so, she begins to play her role perfectly, smiling, apologizing, staying small. In Jungian language, she becomes an archetype trapped within her own persona: the pleaser, the caretaker, the savior, the woman who bends until she breaks. Yet, beneath the performance, her shadow stirs. That hidden, unloved part of her that holds the anger, the desire, the unspoken truth. The part that knows she was never meant to be small. It watches from the corners of her dreams, whispering, "There is more." But to listen to it would mean to betray the old story. And betrayal feels like death. To the ego, it is death. To let go of the old story, one must walk into the underworld of the self. She must face the ghosts of her past not as enemies but as mirrors. Every painful memory, every rejection, every moment she was made to doubt her worth, they are not punishments, but invitations. Each one says, "Look deeper." Each one pulls her toward the place where her true self waits, untouched by the noise of the world. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. It demands that she let her illusions burn. The illusion that if she performs perfectly, she will be loved. The illusion that pain means failure. The illusion that she must be chosen to be worthy. These are the chains forged in the fires of childhood conditioning, cultural expectation, and generational silence. And like any soul on the path of individuation, she must break them, not by fighting, but by seeing. Because awareness is the beginning of liberation. When she witnesses her own pain with compassion instead of judgment, something ancient begins to dissolve. The story loosens its grip. The voice of shame grows quieter. She begins to remember who she was before she learned to perform. There is a sacred kind of grief in this remembering. It is not the grief of losing love, it is the grief of meeting oneself after a lifetime of absence. It is raw, holy, disorienting. Yet, in that unraveling, she feels something fierce rising within her, the self, as Jung described it, the wholeness that exists beneath all fragmentation. It does not need to be worthy. It simply is. And as she sits in the ruins of her old story, she realizes nothing was ever wrong with her. What was broken was never her essence, only the image she was forced to carry. The woman who emerges from that realization does not need to prove her worth, she embodies it. Her softness is no longer weakness, it is power under control. Her stillness is not silence, it is the peace of one who no longer seeks validation to exist. Letting go is not forgetting. It is remembering differently. It is reclaiming the narrative from the hands of pain and rewriting it with the ink of truth. The old story may still whisper, but now it has lost its authority. It becomes a teacher instead of a prison. There comes a moment in every woman's life when she feels the old identity cracking, like a serpent shedding its faded skin. It is not a moment of triumph but of disorientation, a quiet implosion beneath the surface of daily life. She may find herself weeping without reason, restless in relationships that once felt secure, drawn to solitude she once feared. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awakening. The soul has grown too large for the story it once inhabited. In the language of Jung, the ego resists this transformation with all its might. It clings to the familiar narrative because it equates safety with sameness. If I let go of who I was, it whispers, who will I be? But the self, the deeper, eternal center, waits patiently behind the curtain. It knows that every unraveling is an initiation, every ending a doorway. The woman who wants to find herself by others' eyes is being called to see herself through her own. At first, this awakening can feel brutal. What once brought comfort now feels hollow. The people who mirrored her wounds may fall away. The patterns that once gave her control begin to fail. She realizes how much of her life has been built around managing other people's emotions, around being good, useful, pleasing. But the truth buried in her bones whispers, goodness is not obedience. Love is not self-erasure. The shadow surfaces here again, no longer a distant echo but a living presence. It appears as rage, as grief, as longing, forces long exile to the unconscious. Society tells her these emotions make her too much, but in reality, they are the raw material of her power. To integrate the shadow is to call these parts home. She learns to sit with her anger without shame, to hold her grief without drowning, to honor her desire without guilt. This is the alchemy of becoming whole. And it is in this crucible that she begins to understand what letting go truly means. It is not about detachment from life, it is detachment from illusion. She no longer believes that love must come at the cost of her authenticity. She no longer mistakes attachment for intimacy. She no longer confuses endurance with strength. The story that once defined her becomes translucent. She can see through it now, see the child beneath the armor, the woman beneath the conditioning. She might find herself walking alone more often, but it is a sacred solitude. For the first time, silence feels like safety. There is no longer a frantic need to explain, to justify, to perform. The noise of comparison begins to fade. What remains is the simple pulse of being, the rhythm of her breath, the grounding weight of her body, the quiet knowing that she is, in this moment, enough. And yet, even as she begins to reclaim herself, the world may not understand. People who are still trapped in their own stories might call her distant, cold, or selfish. They may accuse her of changing, as if change were betrayal. But she will not apologize. The woman who has touched her own depths cannot go back to pretending. For letting go of the old story is not merely emotional, it is existential. It is the death of the false self, the shedding of inherited scripts. It is the moment when the feminine stops seeking permission to exist and begins to stand in the authority of her own soul. The process may not be graceful, but it is sacred. Like birth, it is messy, painful, and miraculous. And when the dust settles, when the echoes of the old life fade, she will find herself standing in the ruins, barefoot, unafraid, and finally free to begin again. Freedom does not arrive with fireworks, it comes quietly, almost shyly, after the storm has passed. At first, it feels like emptiness. The familiar chaos is gone, and what remains is space. Silence. Stillness. To the unhealed mind, this stillness feels unbearable. The ego searches for a new role to play, a new mask to wear, a new story to inhabit. But the woman who has glimpsed the truth begins to see the trap. She senses that rushing to fill the silence would only create another cage. So she waits. She breathes. She learns to rest inside her own being. This waiting is not passive, it is sacred gestation. Something within her is rearranging itself, rebuilding from the inside out. The false layers have fallen away, and beneath them lies something ancient and untouched, her essence. It is the part of her that existed before she learned to please, before she learned to shrink. The self, as Jung would say, is not something she creates, it is something she remembers. In this remembering, the feminine reclaims her inner throne. No longer the maiden seeking validation, she begins to embody the queen archetype, the one who rules not through control, but through presence. Her boundaries are not walls, they are sacred gates. Her compassion no longer means self-sacrifice, it means seeing the divine in herself and in others without losing either. The queen does not chase what leaves her, she blesses it and returns to her center. But this newfound power is not loud. It does not need to shout to be felt. True power, the Stoics understood, lies in mastery of the self. No man is free, Epictetus wrote, who is not master of himself. The same truth applies to her. No woman is free who is still ruled by her old story. Freedom is not the absence of pain, it is the refusal to be defined by it. And so she begins to walk differently. Her movements slow, deliberate, grounded. She speaks less, but every word carries weight. People feel her energy before she even enters the room. It is not the magnetism of someone performing, it is the quiet gravity of authenticity. Her presence becomes a mirror, and others either rise to meet her truth or fall away from it. At times, loneliness may still brush her edges. But even that no longer terrifies her. She has learned that solitude is not punishment, it is purification. It is the place where the noise of the world fades, and her own voice becomes clear again. The woman who has walked through her own darkness knows that every season of isolation carries the seed of rebirth. She understands now that healing is not about erasing pain, it is about transforming her relationship to it. The old story once taught her to avoid discomfort at all costs. The new consciousness invites her to sit with it, to learn its language, to see how even suffering can be a sacred messenger. The Stoics would call this amor fati, the love of one's fate. To embrace everything that has been, not as curse, but as catalyst. And as this truth settles into her bones, she no longer seeks closure from others. The apology that never came, the recognition that never arrived, she releases them. She gives herself the validation she waited for all along. Forgiveness becomes less about others and more about freeing herself from the grip of resentment. Letting go, she realizes, was never about losing anything real. It was about losing what was false. The old story demanded she prove her worth. The new story whispers that she was worthy all along. In the quiet after transformation, something subtle yet profound begins to emerge. She no longer measures her worth in reactions, in compliments, in attention. The mirror that once held her captive now reflects something deeper, not the face shaped by others' expectations, but the gaze of a soul finally awake. The woman she sees there is not perfect, nor does she wish to be. Perfection was the currency of her old self. Presence is the wealth of her new one. Her energy has changed, though she does not announce it. People sense it, sometimes with awe, sometimes with discomfort. The woman who once sought to soothe everyone now makes others confront their own unease. That is the paradox of healing. It doesn't always look like harmony. When a woman stops performing her pain for approval, those who benefited from her self-betrayal will call her cold. When she sets boundaries where she once apologized, they call her difficult. Yet she has learned, it is better to be misunderstood than to live misunderstood by herself. She begins to see the archetypes playing out around her. The woman who chases love to escape emptiness, the man who controls to avoid vulnerability, the friend who manipulates kindness into servitude. She watches it all now with clarity, not judgment. The dance of projection, as Jung described, becomes visible. Each person fighting their own unseen shadow. Once, she was part of this unconscious choreography. Now, she observes it with compassion and with choice. Choice. That is what liberation truly means. The ability to respond, not react. To walk away, not out of pride, but of peace. To love without losing oneself. The old story taught her that love was sacrifice. The new truth shows her that love is expansion. It is not found in clinging, but in freedom. Not in needing, but in presence. And from this place of inner stillness, creativity begins to bloom. She may paint again, write again, dance again. Activities that once felt frivolous now become sacred rituals. Through them, she communes with her own soul. In Jungian language, this is the emergence of the self into conscious life, the psyche integrating its opposites, light and dark, masculine and feminine, chaos and order, into harmony. The masculine within her, once wounded, learns to protect rather than control. The feminine, once silenced, learns to express rather than please. Together they form a union, not of dominance, but of mutual reverence. This is individuation, the full realization of one's unique wholeness. It is not the rejection of the world, but the conscious participation in it, without losing the center. And yet, she remains human. The waves still come. Some days, the old fears whisper again, the fear of abandonment, the hunger for validation, the ache of loneliness. But now she meets them differently. She does not exile them. She breathes with them. She thinks without words, you are part of me too. The pain softens in her acceptance. The storm passes faster. The woman who once sought to control life now moves with it. She trusts the rhythm, the divine timing, the mystery. She knows that peace is not the absence of struggle, but the surrender to what is. She understands what the Stoics meant when they spoke of apatheia, not indifference, but inner freedom, the calm center untouched by chaos. And so, each day becomes a ceremony. The morning light on her skin, the taste of coffee, the sound of rain, all of it sacred, all of it enough. She no longer seeks grand meaning because she has found meaning in simply being. Letting go, she realizes, was never the end of her story. It was the beginning of truth. As she continues walking this quieter, deeper path, she realizes that the real transformation was never about becoming someone new. It was about remembering what had always been there. Beneath every layer of shame, beneath every mask worn for love, beneath every I'm fine uttered to hide the trembling of the soul, there was a woman who had always known her own worth. The process of letting go simply cleared the dust that covered her. And yet, what she has now is not naive peace. It is a peace forged in the fires of truth. It carries the scent of ashes and rebirth. She knows too much now to ever return to unconscious comfort. She has seen the architecture of her own suffering, the way her thoughts build prisons, the way her wounds sculpted her desires, the way love turned to chains when rooted in fear. And because she has seen, she can never again pretend to be blind. This awareness is both a gift and a weight. It asks her to live with radical honesty. No more numbing. No more pretending. She recognizes that healing is not a destination, but a devotion, a continuous returning to the present moment with compassion. Some days, she will stumble. Some days, she will forget. But even forgetting is sacred now, because it reminds her of her humanness. She begins to feel tenderness toward the woman she once was, the one who clung, the one who begged to be chosen, the one who confused pain with passion. That version of her was not weak, she was surviving with the tools she had. She did what she needed to feel safe in a world that taught her to distrust her own voice. Now, she thanks that woman. Without her endurance, this awakening would not exist. And in this gratitude, the cycle of self-rejection finally breaks. For the first time, she looks back at her past and feels no shame, no bitterness, only understanding. The pain was the teacher. The loss was the doorway. Every ending she cursed was actually an initiation. Each heartbreak, each silence, each goodbye carved out the space where wisdom could enter. The Jungian path of individuation is not linear, it spirals. Each time she believes she's done, life reveals another layer, another truth. But now she greets these revelations with reverence, not resistance. She understands that evolution is endless because the soul is infinite. The work is not to arrive, but to stay open, to life, to love, to herself. And as she stays open, something miraculous happens. Her relationships begin to change. She attracts people who meet her at her depth, who don't need her to be small to feel big, who celebrate her complexity instead of fearing it. Conversations grow slower, richer, more real. Connection is no longer about escaping loneliness, but about expanding presence. Even the way she loves is transformed. It is no longer an anxious reaching, but a calm offering. She gives not to be chosen, but because love flows naturally from the fullness she has become. There is no manipulation, no fear of loss, only truth. She can stand in front of someone and say, "This is who I am," and whether they stay or go, she remains whole. Because wholeness is no longer something she seeks in others, it is the home she carries within. The story that once bound her has dissolved into memory, and memory has turned into wisdom. And so, her life becomes a quiet revolution, not loud, not dramatic, but radiant in its simplicity. A woman no longer ruled by fear, no longer defined by the gaze of others, no longer chained to the past. She walks now not to find herself, but to express herself. Not to prove, but to embody. Not to be chosen, but to choose. The woman who understands her worth does not chase, she chooses.